The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to slice with a knife. Every seat was filled, reporters lined the back wall, their cameras ready to capture every moment. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone knew this case was more than just another legal battle. It was personal. Pam Bondi sat at the prosecution table, her expression composed but her eyes sharp as daggers. She had handled high-profile cases before, but this one carried a different weight. The defendant, a powerful businessman with deep political ties, had managed to dodge justice for years. But not this time. Not if she had anything to do with it. The moment the judge, Harold Kensington, entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the crowd. He was a man known for his unpredictability, a reputation that left attorneys guessing which version of him they would get on any given day. As he settled into his seat, his gaze flickered toward Bondi with something that almost looked like disdain. "Miss Bondi," Judge Kensington drawled, adjusting his glasses as he peered down at her over the bench. "I trust you're ready to proceed, though I do hope you've come armed with more than just theatrics this time." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Bondi's jaw tightened, but she refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she straightened her papers and responded with a steady voice. "Your Honor, I assure you, I came prepared with facts and the law, as always." Kensington smirked, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath, though the microphone picked it up just enough for those in the front rows to catch. Bondi ignored the comment and pressed forward. "The prosecution is ready to present evidence proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant engaged in fraudulent business practices, embezzlement, and witness tampering." Before she could continue, Kensington held up a hand. "Miss Bondi, spare us the grandstanding, get to the point, and make it quick. I have more important cases on my docket today." Another wave of murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, some exchanging knowing glances. This wasn't the first time Kensington had clashed with a prosecutor, but there was an unmistakable edge to his words. Pam took a deep breath, refusing to let him throw her off. "Your Honor, this case is as important as any other. The victims—" Kensington cut her off with a loud sigh. "Miss Bondi, I've been on this bench for over 20 years. I know when a case is being overblown for political theatre. Let's not waste the court's time with unnecessary dramatics." This time, the shock was audible. A few gasps, a couple of whispers. Even the defense attorney glanced sideways at the judge, as if questioning whether he'd gone too far. Pam's grip tightened on the edge of the podium, but her voice remained steady. "Your Honor, I respectfully object to that characterization. This case is built on extensive evidence." "Enough," Kensington snapped, slamming his gavel. "Do not lecture me on how this court operates, Miss Bondi. Present your argument or sit down." A heavy silence followed. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. Bondi took another deep breath, her mind racing. She knew he was trying to humiliate her, to push her into reacting emotionally, but she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "As I was saying," she continued, her voice unwavering, "we have financial records, witness testimony, and communication logs that clearly establish a pattern of fraud and intimidation." Kensington smirked again, shaking his head. "Oh, I'm sure you do." It was subtle, but the way he said it sent a ripple of unease through the courtroom. There was something condescending, almost mocking in his tone. Pam paused for just a fraction of a second, studying the judge carefully. Something was off. His hostility toward her wasn't just impatience or ego. There was something else beneath it, something calculated. And in that moment, she realized, Judge Kensington wasn't just biased. He had a reason to want this case buried. What that reason was, she wasn't sure yet, but she was going to find out. Pam Bondi had faced her fair share of difficult judges, but there was something different about Judge Harold Kensington. His behavior wasn't just dismissive, it was personal. The way he smirked, the way he shot down her arguments before she could even present them, the way he seemed almost eager to discredit her in front of a packed courtroom. It wasn't just arrogance, it was something deeper. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Reporters exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Even members of the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was off. But Kensington didn't seem to care. He leaned back in his chair, watching her like a cat toying with a mouse, daring her to challenge him. Pam wasn't about to back down. She turned to the first witness, a former employee of the defendant's company, who had risked everything to testify. The man was visibly nervous, wringing his hands as he adjusted his tie. "Mr. Reynolds," Pam began, her voice calm and reassuring, "can you tell the court about the financial discrepancies you discovered while working as an accountant for the defendant's company?" Reynolds swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I noticed irregularities in the accounts, large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts under false business names. When I brought it to my supervisor's attention, I was told to mind my own business. A week later, I was fired." Pam nodded. "And did you report these discrepancies to anyone?" "I tried," Reynolds said, his voice shaky. "I sent an anonymous tip to the Financial Crimes Division, but nothing happened. Then, a few days after I was fired, I started getting threats, calls, emails. They said I should forget what I saw or else." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. This was damning testimony. Pam turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the email records and financial documents Mr. Reynolds provided." "Denied," Kensington interrupted. The courtroom fell silent. Pam blinked. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" "Denied," he repeated, his tone almost amused. "These so-called documents are circumstantial at best. You're wasting this court's time." Pam's stomach tightened. This wasn't just hostility. This was obstruction. She stepped forward, her voice measured but firm. "Your Honor, these documents directly support the charges against the defendant. They establish a pattern of fraud. Miss Bondi," Kensington sighed, rubbing his temples, "do I need to remind you who is in charge of this courtroom?" Pam took a deep breath. She couldn't lose her temper. Not here. Not now. "No, Your Honor, but I must object to the exclusion of key evidence without proper review." Kensington smirked. "Duly noted. Now move on." Pam clenched her jaw but obeyed. She continued questioning Reynolds, who gave more details about the fraudulent transactions. But every time the testimony pointed to solid evidence, Kensington found a way to brush it aside, either by striking statements from the record or belittling her line of questioning. By the time Reynolds stepped down, Pam knew what she was dealing with. Judge Kensington wasn't just difficult, he was compromised. The question was, how deep did it go? As the court recessed for lunch, Pam gathered her files, but before she could leave, Kensington called out to her. "Miss Bondi," a word. She turned to face him as he leaned over the bench, lowering his voice just enough so that only she could hear. "I suggest you tread carefully," he said, his eyes gleaming with something almost smug. "Some fights aren't worth picking." Pam stared at him, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a bad judge, this was something bigger, something dangerous. And now, she was right in the middle of it. Pam Bondi walked out of the courtroom with her mind racing. Judge Kensington's warning wasn't just an offhand remark, it was a threat. The smug way he had said it, the condescending tone, the clear message in his eyes, back off, or there will be consequences. But backing off wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. As she made her way to her office, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Jordan, I need you to dig into Judge Kensington. Bank records, real estate, offshore accounts. Everything. Something isn't right." Her investigator, Jordan Hayes, didn't hesitate. "Got it. Give me a few hours." Pam hung up and sat down at her desk, staring at the stack of evidence that Kensington had dismissed like it was nothing. Reynolds' testimony had been solid. The documents were airtight. Any other judge would have allowed them into evidence without hesitation. But Kensington had shut her down before the jury could even get a proper look. She took a deep breath and reached for her laptop. If Kensington thought he could intimidate her, he had seriously underestimated who he was dealing with. 2 hours later, her phone buzzed. "I found something," Jordan said, his voice tight. "It's bad." Pam straightened. "How bad?" "Let's just say our dear Judge Kensington has a few skeletons in his closet. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, suspicious wire transfers linked to shell corporations, and get this, one of those corporations is connected to our defendant." Pam felt a chill crawl up her spine. "You're telling me the judge is on his payroll?" Jordan exhaled. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. There's more. Kensington bought a vacation home last year, a $4 million property in cash. No record of where the money came from." Pam clenched her fist. That explains a lot. She hung up and stared at the wall, her mind racing. Kensington wasn't just biased, he was dirty. He wasn't just protecting the defendant out of personal spite, he was protecting his own interests. She needed to act, fast. The next morning she walked into court with a renewed sense of purpose. She had no intention of playing Kensington's game anymore. As the session began, she stood confidently. "Your Honour, I'd like to make a motion." Kensington sighed dramatically. "Miss Bondi, must we go through this again?" Pam met his gaze head on. "Yes, we must. I'm filing a motion to have you recused from this case due to a conflict of interest." The entire courtroom gasped. Even the defense attorney turned to look at her, eyes wide. Kensington stiffened. "Excuse me?" Pam held up a folder. "I have evidence that you have financial ties to the defendant's company. Offshore accounts, real estate purchases with unexplained funds. Should I continue?" Kensington's face turned red. "This is outrageous. I will not tolerate baseless accusations in my courtroom." Pam didn't back down. "Then explain the wire transfers." Silence. The jury, the spectators, even the bailiffs were frozen in place, waiting to see what Kensington would say. His jaw tightened. "I will not dignify this with a response. Your motion is denied." Pam expected that. "Then I'll be taking this to the Judicial Oversight Committee." Kensington slammed his gavel. "You're out of line, Miss Bondi." Pam folded her arms. "And you're out of time, Your Honour." At that moment the courtroom doors swung open. 2 federal agents stepped inside, their badges flashing. "Judge Harold Kensington," one of them announced. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The room erupted in chaos. Kensington shot up from his chair, his face pale. "You can't be serious!" One of the agents stepped forward. "Serious enough to charge you with bribery, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Pam watched as Kensington was pulled from the bench, handcuffed in front of the very courtroom he had ruled over for years. Justice had been served, and she had been the one to deliver it. The moment Judge Harold Kensington was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, frantic whispers, and the rapid clicking of reporters' cameras filled the air. Some people stood in shock, others murmured to one another, struggling to process what had just unfolded before their eyes. A sitting judge, one of the most powerful figures in the legal system, had just been arrested in front of the very courtroom he presided over. It was the kind of moment that would be replayed on every news station, analysed by political commentators, and turned into headline after headline. Pam Bondi remained standing at the prosecution's table, her face calm, her hands resting firmly on the wooden surface. Inside, however, her pulse was racing. She had fought countless battles in the courtroom, but this was something entirely different. Taking down a corrupt judge in the middle of an active trial was unprecedented. Even for her. The defense attorney, still visibly rattled, stood hesitantly. "Your Honour, in light of these shocking developments, I'd like to request an immediate review of how this case should proceed." A temporary judge had already been called in, a no-nonsense federal magistrate named Judge Evelyn Williams. She adjusted her glasses and nodded. "I agree, counsel. This case has been tainted by judicial misconduct. We will reconvene after a full review of Kensington's rulings and determine whether a mistrial is warranted. Until then, this court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, signalling the abrupt end of the day's proceedings. Pam let out a slow breath as she gathered her files, her mind already shifting to the next phase. As she exited the courtroom, she was met with a flood of reporters, cameras flashing as journalists threw questions at her from all sides. "Miss Bondi, did you suspect Kensington was corrupt from the start? How will this impact your case against the defendant? Are you worried about retaliation?" Pam held up a hand. "I appreciate your questions, but right now I'm focused on ensuring this case is prosecuted fairly. No further comments at this time." With that, she pushed through the crowd and stepped outside, where Jordan Hayes was waiting for her, leaning casually against a black SUV. His arms were crossed, and a knowing smirk played on his lips. "Well," he said as she approached, "that was one hell of a power move." Pam exhaled, shaking her head. "It wasn't about power, Jordan. It was about justice." Jordan chuckled. "Justice with a side of public humiliation. You really put Kensington in his place." Pam met his gaze. "He thought he was untouchable. Turns out he was wrong." Jordan's smirk faded as he leaned in slightly. "You know this isn't over, right? Kensington may be out, but the defendant, he's still dangerous. People like that don't go down without a fight. Pam nodded. I know, but now we fight on even ground. Just then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. A text message appeared. Nice work today, Miss Bondi, but be careful. You've made powerful enemies. Pam stared at the words for a long moment, her grip tightening on the phone. Jordan noticed her reaction. Something wrong? Pam locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. Nothing I can't handle. Jordan narrowed his eyes. You sure? She gave him a small, confident smile. Positive. But deep down, she knew what this meant. Taking down Kensington was just the beginning. Corruption didn't operate in isolation. There were others behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Whoever had sent that message was watching, waiting. As she looked up at the city skyline, she felt the weight of what was ahead. There would be more battles, more corruption to root out, more people willing to do whatever it took to keep their power intact. But she was ready. And no matter what came next, she wasn't backing down.